Hello and welcome to the 13th Annual Youth Summit, presented by the Florida Youth Council and the Family Cafe. The Florida Youth Council is excited to welcome you and all emerging leaders to this special virtual event. My name is Nikki Germain. I work here at the Family Cafe and I am over the Florida Youth Council. And with me today is Alex Gonzalez.
Thank you, Nikki. Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex Gonzalez, and I am the lead member of the Florida Youth Council. For those of you who don't know the Florida Youth Council, the Florida Youth Council itself is a group of young Floridians with disabilities that are focused on promoting leadership and advocacy and encouragement to their peers to succeed in life. The annual Youth Summit, as we mostly do every single year, is a two-day event that is designed by the youth and emerging leaders of the FYC to completely by the youth for the youth. Unfortunately, we won't be able to have a face-to-face because since the current pandemic is still going on, so we decided for the first time this year, we'll have a virtual event. And we also wanted to thank you for everyone for joining us on Facebook Live. We really appreciate all your support that you have done for Family Cafe and for the Florida Youth Council. And if you have any questions for today's session, make sure you leave in the comment section down below. So without further ado, I want to introduce to Lacey DeSherry, presenting our session of Find the Leader Within.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here on a wonderful Saturday morning. Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'd like to open a little bit, because we're going to talk a lot about leadership and what does that really mean and how do you know who's a leader and how do you become a leader? How do you, what constitutes? So we're going to talk a lot about that. But what I want to do first is open up and invite everybody to close their eyes. If you haven't had too much coffee yet, maybe keep your eyes open because we don't want to fall asleep again. But I want to go through a visioning activity. And so I'm curious to know, I'm going to describe a person, right? And this person experienced a lot of abuse growing up, a lot of trauma. One of the parents was in and out of prison. The other was an active alcoholic. This person had multiple mental health diagnoses, also diagnosed in substance use, had PTSD, thoughts and actions towards suicide. And I really want to know, you can type in the comments too. I hope that you'll type in the comments if you can. What does this person look like? When you envision this person coming into your mind, what does that person look like? What color are they? How much money do they have? What kind of job do they work in? What kind of car do they drive? What does their daily life look like? Okay, and then I want to describe another person. And this person has 3 master's degrees, is a published author, has traveled all over the country and all over the world, public speaker, started their own company when they were 25. They serve on the boards of international and national organizations, on stages with celebrities. I want you to think about, what does that person look like? What gender are they? What color are they? What do they do for a job? How much money do they make? What kind of car do they drive? What does their daily life look like? And then I'd love for you to comment, do you think those are the same person? Yes or no, yes or no, yes or no. Are those the same person? And I love opening up with that activity because I think it really helps to shatter some of the myths and stigmas, because both of those people are actually me. So I am a person who experienced foster care. I went into foster care whenever I was 15 with 5 of my siblings due to abuse and neglect that was happening in my home. And I consequently had a lot of trauma, right, from some of the types of abuse that I experienced as a child. And I absolutely did not want to deal with my mental health at all. I shut it away. I thought, I'm fine. I can pretend. If I just pretend hard enough, it's going to go away. And so then as I continue to go to college and then I find alcohol, and I find that really kind of helps address some of the mental health stuff. At the time, I really got into some really unhealthy situations. And through that process, though, I felt like I had to have two totally different faces on. I had to have this face that pretended like everything was okay, like everything was perfect, that I couldn't tell anybody that I was struggling or that something was wrong, because then people would know that I was wrong, right? So I internalized all of what had happened to me, thinking that I was wrong and that I was bad, which we'll talk about at the end of the conference as well. That'll be really exciting. But then the other side was really struggling, and the part of me that was struggling so much felt so lonely and isolated, and I didn't know what I was dealing with. I didn't know that there were names for the diagnoses that I needed. I didn't know that me not being able to get out of bed every day was called depression. I didn't know that when I would re-experience an event and break down and cry for hours and hyperventilate, I didn't know that was called PTSD. I didn't know there were treatments for these things. I didn't know that there were other people who were experiencing these things as well. And so once I opened up, once I finally shared, I remember the moment where I decided that I was a national consultant. I was traveling all over to other states, helping other youth advisory boards in foster care to help them use their voice to change the foster care system. And I used to take my makeup bag to work every day. And that makeup bag was what helped me to keep my pretend face on. I would be breaking down and crying in the bathroom just about every day. And I had that red makeup bag that I would take with me so that I could put my face back on and walk back out and pretend like I was fine. And finally, one day I looked at myself in the mirror and my red splotchy face, because I was struggling so much. I had gotten to the point of, really not wanting to be here anymore. And I just made a decision that, you know what? I'm not going to put my makeup back on today. I'm going to walk down that hallway. And if somebody decides that they're going to ask me what's wrong, I'm going to tell them that I'm not okay. And I'm going to tell them what's going on. And so I walked back down the hallway. I didn't know what was going to happen, but my director, because they understood young people, they understood mental health, they understood humans, that if you see something, ask if people are okay. And she asked me, "Are you okay?" And I just started bawling in the middle of the hallway at work and said, "No, I'm not." And so she pulled me into her office and we talked, and one thing led to another. And eventually I got access to help. I was willing to reach out and go and get that help. And through that journey of understanding that, oh, I have unmet mental health needs, and getting that help, then I was able to get in contact with this whole other youth movement happening that was around the mental health space. And for me, that's really where that connection, I started to understand that connection between my story, what I was struggling with, and me healing and getting better had to do with leadership. Because that is when I realized that my voice can make a difference, especially when I'm joined with the voices of other people who are experiencing similar things just like me. And when we join our voices together to say what's okay, what's not okay, here's what needs to change, and here's how we think that needs to happen, then we were really making changes. We were making changes in states at the national level for youth in foster care and for youth experiencing mental health challenges. And so at that point, I realized, okay, there is something to this, right? So our voice has the potential for leadership. And so I would love to hear from you in the comments as well. Are you connected with a group? Have you reached out to people? What are you experiencing right now? Are you part of a leadership group? I would love to see that in the chat. And so fast forward, about 15 years, I've gotten a couple of degrees. I've moved. I still get to do work with young people, though not as much as I like. When I was in this podcast in January, I was telling my story, and I had always felt like parts of me were so siloed and segmented, right? So I have the foster care side of things, and I had done that for about 7 years. And then I had the mental health stuff, and I did that for about 7 years. And then 4 years ago, I finally entered into substance use recovery, realized that alcohol was actually, I was using that as a treatment for mental health and to avoid emotions, and it was not helpful. And so finally, I found my way into substance use recovery as well. And so I had all of these pieces that I was really proud of and I, was engaged and involved in, but they always felt so separated, right? So I think part of that can be because, as young people and we're in systems, we have to go to this place for this item with ourselves and this place for this part. And so it can feel really segmented within ourselves. And that's not how we are as humans, right? And so finally, I was on a podcast in, I don't know, January this year or something. And I learned and I realized like I had this huge light bulb moment go off that was like, oh my gosh, leadership is that common thread through all of those experiences. Because when I use my voice to influence others, that is leadership. And so that's what I want to talk about today is that old school leadership talks about who is a leader and who isn't a leader, right? And so either you're and older leadership talks about trait leadership is what this is called. You either are born a leader and you have the traits to be a leader, or you're born not a leader, right? And that's totally false. Totally false. Because so I'm actually getting my PhD in leadership, which just means that I really, really, really love school. And I really, really, really love studying leadership. And I don't like writing the papers so much, but I really like learning about it. And so there's been new studies and new development theories on leadership. And so that means that how I like to talk about leadership is that everybody, if you are a friend, if you're a family member, if you are part of a group, if you are a parent, then you are a leader. Okay. Anybody that can use their voice to influence other people, you are a leader. And you might not see yourself as a leader yet, and that's okay. But everybody has the capacity to lead. And so skills are something that are developed. Leadership skills can be developed. And it's not just that you're born with it or you're not. Same thing with courage. Courage are skills that you can develop. And so that's good news because that means that we can all learn to be leaders and more effective leaders, right, in our lives. And so I think one of the first things is that what is a leader, what is not a leader? I don't like to use that language because I think that it puts people in boxes that don't make any sense, and it doesn't give us an opportunity to grow from there. And so when I say leader, I mean all of you. Every single person that's watching this right now, that's who I'm talking about. Whether you've come into your leadership or not, whether you know all of your leadership skills or not, whether you have names for how you're a leader or not, you still have the capacity to lead. And so when I say leaders, I mean everybody. And we want to talk a little bit about the types of leadership. And so there's a lot of different theories. I'm not going to go into a big boring lecture on all of the leadership theories because that's a lot. But a couple of them that I think are really important to me and in my leadership approach are servant leadership, which means that we pay attention to the needs of the followers and people that we're trying to serve. Transformational leadership, which means that we inspire other people to want to change and make changes themselves and together, right? So it's not this top down, I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to go do it. It's let's all come up with the ideas together. Let's all brainstorm together. Let's all be inspired together and let's all make changes together. And then what is my most important is authentic leadership. And so authentic leadership has been such a journey. And if you don't know about authentic leadership, it is absolutely my favorite thing to talk about because my number one value is authenticity. And so for me, that means being honest with myself, being honest about myself, with who I am, and continually learning about who I am, but then also letting other people be exactly who they are and helping them to become the most authentic version of themselves that they can be. And so I think when people are able to do that and have a space that's safe enough for us to come into our own and to show up as ourselves and not be afraid, when we truly are happy with ourselves and we don't have to. So I know like I still struggle with social anxiety a lot. So if it's work related, I feel pretty good about that. I feel really confident that I can talk to people in a large setting. But if it's a personal social situation, I still get really shut down, really scared, really, just it's hard to have conversations. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. And so I just kind of tend to withdraw, right? And so that's something that I'm working on. It's like, how do I become more authentic in myself, regardless of the situation I'm in, right? Because again, we are leaders in both situations. We are leaders in our personal lives. If people look up to us, if we influence others, we are a leader. You are a leader. So let's talk about seeing ourselves as leaders. So how many, and just go ahead and comment in the box, on the comments, how many of you see yourself as a leader? Or before I said everybody is a leader, how many of you saw yourself as a leader already? You can just say yes, no, or add any comments that you'd want. I'd love to see those. So I was very, very fortunate. I was one of like 3 youth leaders that got to attend this thing called Georgetown Leadership Academy. And it's where they bring like 120 people that work in the behavioral health space from all over the country together to learn leadership skills. And they talk more about adaptive leadership, which is when you're leading like big scale change, which is what we do in like government systems and, mental health systems and all that. But anyway, we were at this academy, and one of the first questions that was asked was, when did you first see yourself as a leader? And we had to write a whole few pages of a journal article on when did we first see ourselves as a leader? And then as everybody was sharing around the room, so a lot of people would say like, well, it was the first time that I got this certain job where I had a team to direct, or it was when I became a project director, or, it was when I started my own nonprofit organization or whatever. And when it came to me, looking back, it wasn't when I was the captain of the soccer team. It wasn't when I, was on the youth advisory board, like you all had the youth council. It wasn't when I got to that position and I got a position there and was president. That wasn't when I first saw myself as a leader. The first time I saw myself as a leader was when I had to speak up about the abuse and neglect happening in my home. And that led me and 5 of my siblings to go into foster care. And that was when I knew that my voice could make a difference. And that was when I knew that my voice influenced other people's lives and that my voice had an impact. And that was the first time that I really knew that I was a leader, that I had that power in my voice to make changes for other people, right? And so it was very scary. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know where we would go or where we would end up. We had heard horrible stories about foster care. And ultimately, everything worked out, pretty well for the most part. And so it was absolutely better than where we were. But that was the first time. So when people say, oh, when was the first time you thought you saw yourself as a leader? I do not believe that you have to be in some kind of a leadership program or have some kind of a position in order to be a leader. I fully believe, and I'm writing a book right now, it's called Lived Experience Leadership, that it's a new concept that we actually develop leadership skills through overcoming really hard things in our life. And some of the leadership skills that I learned in that experience were I learned to speak up. I learned to navigate systems. I learned to listen to my siblings and understand what they wanted in that situation. I learned to have courage and have the hard conversation to say what was happening in my home. I learned to navigate through uncertainty, right? So like right now, we're all learning to navigate through uncertainty. We don't know everything that's going to be happening every day, right? It's been nothing. We didn't expect to have this whole pandemic, right? And so we are actually learning leadership skills right now as it's challenging, as it's hard. And so as we gain these leadership skills, it doesn't always feel like it in the moment, right? So my sponsor talks about, how, and I say spiritual growth, spiritual progress feels like pain in the moment, and we don't get to see the growth until after, right? And so when things are hard and when we're going through really hard moments, we're actually gaining skills in those moments. We're actually growing in those moments, but we might not recognize it until we get that perspective and we're able to look back in that moment. And so one of the things that, so I would love to know for everybody that's watching, if you would type in the chat or the comments, I'd love to hear when you first saw yourself as a leader, or if you don't yet, and that's okay too, right? So it's all a journey. So when did you first see yourself as a leader? And yeah, it doesn't, and again, it's leadership is not a position and it's not a program, right? So we can gain leadership skills through those things. Absolutely. That's how it's typically always been done. And I want us to switch our thinking to, okay, if things are hard and I'm feeling really down and really discouraged, what leadership skills am I gaining right now? And so let's talk a little bit more about what leadership skills are. So leadership has been studied since the 1940s, and the military was the first people who really started studying leadership. But what I really get excited about is looking at in the 80s. So when the big recession came in the 80s, there was a big recession. A lot of people lost jobs. You know, I'm not going to go into economics, but people were still leaving these companies, even though like it was really hard to find jobs, and people were still saying, no, I'm leaving this company. It's bad. I need to go. And so they started looking at, okay, so what is happening that these people are leaving these jobs? And what they found is that they were leaving for two reasons. One, they either had a toxic boss or there was a toxic culture. And so if you think about the times where you have really not liked something or not wanted to be in a place, was it, you know, the person who was supposed to be leading the group, or was it the culture, how everybody responded to each other? And so that's when the leadership that I get excited about really started, because that's when they started looking at, okay, so then if these are the things that people are leaving, right? These are the leadership reasons people are leaving, then let's look at the really good leaders, and let's look at the really good places where people are happy and they want to stay and they're very excited to be there. And so the researchers did studies for like 10 years and found out that there are actually behaviors and skills that these leaders are doing that make people want to stay, want to be engaged, want to be on their team. And so that's really kind of what led to leadership competencies. And so that's a big word, but it just means it's what do leaders do? What do we know? And what are the skills that we have? And so I want to talk a little bit about some of those just to clarify, what do I mean when I say leadership skills? So some of those are communication, right? So being able to say clearly what it is that we need and we want and what we want to have happen, right? Anybody struggled with communication, miscommunications? It's one of the most common challenges that teams have and humans have and people in relationships have. So it is one that we constantly work on throughout our lives to keep getting better. The flip side of communication is listening, right? So we have to be able to listen, but not just to hear, but to understand. Okay, so we have to hear what people are saying and we have to understand what they mean. And so one of the things that we can do with that is to pause. It's called level 2 listening, take our thoughts out of it, right? So if any of you are sitting there like, okay, what am I going to say to this person when they're finished talking? And I'm already like coming up with what I'm going to say. If we're doing that in our head, then we're not actually listening. And so that is one of the biggest key leadership skills, especially in servant leadership and transformational leadership, that we can have is listening, and listening for understanding, right? And then we have, you know, some of the relationship things like conflict management. That's huge. That is one of the hardest ones to develop over time. It is one that leads to the most challenges in companies or teams or relationships. And if we can shift our mindset around it and see it as an opportunity to clarify things, then it can be one of the most effective things that we can do for our team or our relationship. So there's conflict, there's, you know, maintaining relationships and checking in, you know, how are you today? And that emotional intelligence, huge. So Brene Brown talks about emotional literacy. And what we mean by that is, you know, really our ability to see emotions in ourselves, see emotions in others. And then empathy is that ability to connect to the emotion that somebody else is feeling underneath the experience that they're having. And so if we want to be effective leaders, we have to be able to recognize emotions in ourselves, right? So we're going to talk a lot more about this in the last keynote, but when we feel emotions coming up for ourselves. We have to be able to recognize that. We have to be able to manage it, right? So anybody in here, like when they get really frustrated, like at a youth leadership group meeting, and you really want to say something and everybody else is talking, and you really and you can feel it start to, like, you feel it in your body, like for me, my face gets hot and I feel it like in my stomach, and I like kind of sit up and like, because I'm getting frustrated, right? Because I need to get this energy out of me. So that's kind of where emotion starts for us, right? We feel it before we know it up here. And so when we as leaders can start to feel that emotion and recognize for what it is, and then we can manage it, right? So we don't always have to act on our emotions. Sometimes it's really hard not to, but as we practice more, and this is a leadership skill, emotional regulation is a leadership skill, to manage those emotions and then be able to be productive in what we say, right? So we might have to find other ways. We might have to write stuff down, or we might have to go and process for a second and come back. But that is absolutely a leadership skill. So next time you're sitting in a group or in a leadership group in a meeting and you're really frustrated because you're wanting to say something and all that stuff, and you're feeling like this this physical feeling, and then you're experiencing emotion, just realize that, oh, as I practice overcoming this, I'm actually learning a leadership skill right now. So we want to really bring in that awareness into ourselves so that we can recognize where we are in our bodies, how it shows up for us, and then what do we do with it, right? Because that's leadership. That's sometimes doing what we kind of goes against our instinct sometimes, but it's managing that for the betterment of the group or the people that we're serving, right? So that's leadership. And then of course, there's some other leadership skills that are more task oriented. There's a lot of research that talks about, well, are leaders better when they focus on relationships, or are leaders better when they focus on getting tasks done? And in reality, and what the research shows, is that leaders who can do both are the most effective leaders. So we have to make sure that we're maintaining those relationships, those personal connections, that conflict, that communication, that emotional literacy, that empathy. And we also have to be able to manage tasks, right? So strategic thinking and strategic agility are two other leadership skills. And so are we able to think down the line? Are we able to plan ahead? Are we able to bring everybody's voices together so that we can all decide what it is, what's the solution to whatever challenge we're trying to achieve, right? So that's strategic thinking. And strategic agility means that we can change course based on new information. So if we had all agreed that we're going to hold this event on Friday night, and we wanted to do a poetry slam, and we wanted to do this and that, and then we find out that, okay, the electricity went out in the building and they're not going to be able to turn it back on until Monday. Well, okay. So strategic agility is that ability to kind of sit back and recalibrate, like the GPS says, recalculating. You have to be able to do that with your team, right? And as a leader, you have to be able to, okay, without, you might feel frustration, you might feel that emotional response, but manage that and then get back into strategic thinking and agility around, okay, so if we can't do that, then what can we do and sort of regroup, right? Do we want to postpone? Do we want to come up with a new idea? Do we want to have a glowing dance party without, that's battery powered, whatever it is, right? So those are some of the leadership skills. And then the task management, right? So be able to prioritize your tasks, understand what's most important, and the order that they need to be done in, and then being able to help other people manage that. So if people are struggling with, say, getting a newsletter out, or people are struggling to speak up and use their voice, sometimes it's really our job to, as leaders, to help them get the skills that they need. And recognize the strengths that people bring and what they want to be doing, right? And making sure. So there's a really great author on leadership that talks about, do we have the right people on the bus? And are the people in the right seats on the bus? So do we have the right people on the team? And as leadership groups, I know that some of you all do applications and reviews and that sort of thing, but even if not, everybody has a skill that they can bring to the table. The question is, for you as a leader, are you considering what skills everybody has and what are the strengths that everybody has, and making sure that they're able to contribute with the strengths that they do have. So hugely important as a leader. If you are not doing that right now, I want you to write this down so that you can kind of do a journal entry on this. What skills does each of my team members have? And are we setting it up to where they can be using those strengths that they have? Okay. So that's kind of a lot of skills. So I threw out maybe, 6 to 8 leadership skills. The tool that I've used that these people developed, the researchers that I talked about in the big recession, they have 67 leadership competencies that they've developed. 67. That's a lot. And so, but there are some that are more important, that have been identified as more important than others. And so those are the top 8, some of that we just talked about today. So as you reflect on your experience and as you move forward, what I encourage you to do, and we'll move into some other things, but specifically on the leadership skills, is to think about, okay, how am I developing leadership skills? When things are hard, what am I learning? How am I growing in this moment? And sometimes we need our friends or family to remind us that, okay, things are hard right now. What are we learning? How are we growing in this moment? Because we can't always remember that. I know I can't always remember that whenever I'm feeling really down, something really hard has happened, I'm in a lot of emotion. I can't always remember that, okay, I'm actually gaining leadership skills right now. I'm actually growing as a person right now. That's why I have other people in my life to help remind me of that when I'm in it. So if you want to type in the chat right now, I'd love to hear who your support people are. And you can just leave it generic with my friend, or my mom, or my teammates, or my, whatever, or you can hashtag or @ them, like tag their names in the comments if you want to give them a shout out. Who are your people? Who are your people that help remind you of your strengths? Who are your people that you see as leaders? Who are your people that can remind you that, okay, when you're going through hard times, you're actually gaining leadership skills and you're actually growing? And so then one of the next things we talk about in leadership development is, what are the barriers that we've put on ourselves that keep us in place, that keep us from growing, right? So when you think about a mindset, it's the way that we think about things. And there's a growth mindset and there's a fixed mindset. And so a fixed mindset says, this is how things are, this is how they're going to stay, and I want them to stay the same. And that might work for some people. Growth mindset is, this is how things are, I want to keep getting better, I want to keep growing, I know that I can grow and change, I can learn new things, and I want to learn those new things. That's growth mindset. And so it doesn't mean that people, just like it's not true that you're either a leader or not a leader. It's also not true that you're either fixed or growth mindset, right? So we can go back and forth between those things. Like, I might be fixed mindset in, one area of my life, and I might be growth mindset in another area, right? So it's not right or wrong. And sometimes fixed mindset can help us, with where we are and like staying safe where we are. But growth mindset is where I really like to focus. And that's how we develop leadership skills, right? So one of my favorite quotes is from Rumi. He's a Persian poet from like the way back in the day, right? Like 400 AD or whatever. So he has a quote that says, our job is not to seek love, but to seek out the barriers that we've built up against love. And I love that quote because you can insert anything and change out love and put anything else in. So in my recovery journey, and I'm not going to get too spiritual here, but I use that quote to identify, okay, it's not my job to seek out a relationship with a higher power. It's my job to seek out the barriers that I've built up against that relationship with a higher power. And so you can put anything you want in here. It's not your job to seek out leadership skills. It's your job to seek out what are the barriers you've built against leadership skills, right? And so when we talk about this concept, there's a lot of different ways to think about this concept. It can be barriers. It can be walls. It can be, limiting beliefs. So in coaching, we talk about limiting beliefs. It can be limiting mindsets. But what are the limits that we're putting on ourselves that we actually don't even realize that we're putting on ourselves? So that's so important to be able to identify what those barriers are. And sometimes that'll take some really deep work. Sometimes you've got to work with a coach on that, or a therapist on that, or another mental health professional. Because sometimes those barriers, and we're again going to talk about that on the last keynote, sometimes those barriers come from messages that we get put on us from other people. So I know in the cross disability movement, we get messages all the time that we are XYZ, not this, not this, not this, because we have XYZ experiences, right? Maybe some of the stigma that we've experienced doesn't say it quite as nicely, but that's basically what's happening, right? So some of those messages that we receive from society, from people who don't understand what we experience and go through, particularly, if we experience some of those invisible challenges, like the behavioral health challenges, like depression and PTSD and some of the other ones, that I think a lot of us probably do experience at some point that are on this call. What are the messages that we're taking and believing and internalizing? We might not want to actually believe it. We might know that, like, no, I'm actually a real person. Just because you see me in a certain way doesn't mean I'm not a whole person, doesn't mean I'm not a real person. And I know in the disability advocacy space that we work a lot on that with, the stigma around, particularly for me in substance use recovery. I have experienced a lot of stigma around that, and foster care. People are still afraid of me. I'll tell you a quick story. I did cage fighting for a few years whenever I was in college, and it was a huge help to my mental health. But I had a friend he was just one of military Marine, like really intense fighter, right? I mean, this just huge bad guy, not bad like bad, but bad like, won a lot of fights. And I remember one day we were hanging out and I told him, oh yeah, he was telling me this story about this foster kid that he had lived with, that his mom had taken in for a while, and how terrifying of an experience that was. And I looked at him and I was like, I'm in foster care. And his face got so scared, and he like stepped back, and he was like actually scared of me. And so that just goes to say like how impactful and how powerful that stigma can be, right? And so what we need to do is think about, okay, what are the messages that stigma is telling me that I'm actually internalizing, that I'm actually taking in, right? So I could easily say that being on foster care meant that I'm bad, right? That I did something bad, I am bad, I am worthless. But really that's a barrier for me to be able to grow and develop leadership skills and to help other people. And so that's where we have to do some work to dig in and identify what are the barriers that I've built up against leading, against being there for other people, against making these changes that I want to see in the world. And so when we can dig in and find those barriers, that's where we can remove the barriers, do the work to remove the barriers. And then we can really grow and really flourish and really gain those leadership skills and keep going with whatever our goals are, right? And so, so the last thing that I want to talk about is, so how do you recognize the skills that you've gained through your experiences? What I like to do with people is I do a lot of journaling. And so this could be verbal, this could be onto a computer, this could be voice to text. I personally like to write it out. I know different people have different options for how they can journal or get things out. And so, so what I encourage people to do is to answer the questions. When did you first see yourself as a leader? If you don't see yourself as a leader, why or why not? What are the hardest things that you've had to overcome? And then what are the leadership skills that you've gained from overcoming those experiences? Because I think when we can shift our mindset about what a leader is and isn't, and we can see ourselves as that, we can see that we actually have some leadership capacity in ourselves, it changes everything. It changes where we go from here, right? We don't stay stuck. We get to go forward. And when we change that mindset, then we can start to understand, okay, what are the barriers I've built up against growing and developing as a leader? And then what are the hardest things that I've gone through? So maybe I haven't gone through some leadership academy or some training or I haven't had a position as a chair president or something like that. Maybe I haven't had those positions or programs yet. Doesn't mean that you're not still a leader. And it doesn't mean that you don't still have a capacity to develop leadership skills. So look at those hard things in your life and then be able to reflect on, okay, what are the skills that I gained from going through that really hard thing? Maybe it's stamina. Maybe it's perseverance. Maybe it's dedication to a cause. Maybe it's finding your passion or using your voice. Those things are leadership skills that we get from life experiences. And so what I would encourage each of you to do, I know I'm going to wrap up with a little place here to leave some space for questions to come in. But what I encourage each of you to do is answer those questions, journal, think about that, envision, identify who you see as a leader, somebody that you look up to, and see what skills do they have, and kind of work backwards and say, okay, so these are the things that I like about them as a leader. So where have I gained these skills, or where can I gain these skills, right? So emulate what you want to see, what you want to be. And identify one action that you can take into becoming more of a leader. So out of all of the things that I shared, you might need to start with, remember the stories that I talked about at the beginning, this person who experienced all of these horrible things, this person who has all these accomplishments, it's actually the same person. So maybe you just need to fill in your story. Maybe that's where you have to start is shifting that mindset to think, okay, maybe I am a leader. Maybe I can be a leader, right? Maybe you do see yourself as a leader. You've had a position and you've thought about the first time you saw yourself as a leader. So maybe your action step is going to be identifying what are the skills that you have, or what skills do you want to develop, and how might you go about developing those? Maybe if you're already a leader and you already know that you've been a leader, you've had positions, you've developed yourself, maybe it's where do I want to get better as a leader? Where do I want to enhance my leadership skills? And then if you're really good at that, then where do I give back to others? Maybe that's your action step. How can I help other people? Who else can I help to develop these leadership skills that I've learned along the way? How can I share this message? It might not be on a public stage. It might be in writing. It might be through blogs. It might be through one-on-one conversations. But if you've got it, pass it on, because that's leadership. So I just want to say thank you all so much. I'm so happy to have been able to be here today. I hope that you can see that I have this huge passion for lived experience leadership. It is something, like I said, I'm writing a book on it. That's how much I like it. And I don't see myself as a writer. That's one of my mindset shifts I have to overcome, right? I have told myself I'm not a writer. But you know what? I'm going to write a book, because I just think it's so important that people understand that we have the capacity to lead. It doesn't matter where you come from, what kind of money you have, what you've accomplished in your life. We all have the capacity to lead, and we have gained those skills through all of the really hard things that we've had to overcome. And so I hope that you've gotten something out of this. I hope that you're shifting the way that you see yourself as a leader, or how you can show up in the world as a leader. And I just wish you luck as you move forward into your leadership journey. And so I think I'll open it up now. If anybody has any questions, please type those into the chat if you haven't, or on the comments if you haven't already. And and we'll go from there.
All right, so I guess it's time for some Q&A. Lacey, we have a few questions for you, a couple of them from our viewers. The first question is, when you were cage fighting, did you beat up that big bad guy? No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. That wasn't the real question. I just want to get a laugh.
I did give a Navy SEAL a black eye that lasted for 3 weeks, though, when we were training. So yeah, it was a great time.
Sorry. Well, the real question is, what are the benefits of leadership, and what skills should I have or someone has if I want to lead others?
great question. So we talked about a few of the leadership skills. So communication, right? Being able to speak clearly about what you want, and make sure that people understand that. Listening is probably the biggest one, right? Listening for understanding, not just to hear people and what they're saying, but listening to really understand what they're saying. And the best thing you can do for that is like reflective listening. So when somebody says something, really understand what they're saying, not just the words, but what's underneath the words, and then be able to say back to them, so what I heard you say is blah, 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 blah. Is that correct? Right? And so, then the relationships, the emotional literacy is one of the biggest things I think in leadership, is being able to identify emotions and manage emotions in yourself, and then identify and connect with emotions in other people, which is empathy. And then tell me the first half of that question again.
What are the benefits of leadership?
Oh, so we all see that quote going around, be the change you want to see in the world. I mean, if you are somebody who is completely happy with how everything in the world is right now, you can just, go back to Netflix or something, or watch Toy Story again, because, it's all about what's the change that you want to see, right? Leadership is what inspires people to be better or do better. And so wherever you see it, whatever change you want to see in the world, is where you can contribute leadership. That's how leadership helps, is to bring other people around who want to do the same thing, want to make those same changes, and make people feel better or do better.
All right, next question. How do you deal with the anger that comes from the trauma?
Ooh, that's a good one. Okay. Well, cage fighting actually helped with that a lot, to be perfectly honest. There's a lot of things that you can do, and if you don't have some kind of professional or connection support, definitely get hooked in with that. For me, I did a lot of journaling. It's been a long journey, right? So in recovery, we do some work around step 6 and 7, which is, what are my character defects? And we really have to process, like, what are the things that I really want to let go of, and what are the things that I don't want to let go of. And anger for me was my best friend, my companion, the thing that kept me safe for a really long time. And I did not want to let go of anger. I was not willing. I said, higher power, nope, I'm keeping this. This is what keeps me safe. And what I had to do over time, it took about 6 months of journaling, like, how does anger serve me? How does anger serve others? How does it hurt me? And how does it hurt others? And so I had to see that anger was actually causing a lot of damage to other people in my life before I was willing to give it up, because it really did keep me safe. And then I did some really amazing therapy at a therapy, like a retreat kind of thing, where we did some anger work, and I got to, like, beat it out of, like, I had this big foam bat in this big foam box, and I was able to beat out some of the anger, and let go of a lot of that, because I too had a lot of anger about I experienced a pretty traumatizing type of abuse whenever I was a child. And so I carried that around a lot. And I think then the biggest thing to be able to do is to replace our coping skills. So when we can gain new coping skills that are more helpful to us and serve us and our families and friends better, then we don't need the anger as much, and we can let it go.
All right, the next question I have is, what is a essential component in order for someone to reach their full potential? Is it like their leadership, or building yourself up, your self-esteem up? Like, what is something that's there that can able to reach into the right direction?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The number one and first thing I would say is growth mindset. So there are books, there are YouTube videos, there's a ton of blogs, about growth mindset. But if we don't believe that we can grow and get better, then we won't. And so that's the very first step that you need to have for any of this other stuff to work, is that I can grow and change, I can develop new skills, and I want to do that. And it's hard work, right? So there's that whole image around comfort zone is here, and the growth zone is like out here, and it's going to be uncomfortable. So we have to get okay with being uncomfortable, but the more we do it, the more comfortable it gets that we're growing and changing. And I think part of that too, not only addressing the barriers that we've built up against our beliefs about ourselves and our ability to grow, is that sometimes we have to, as we grow, we have to accept that relationships around us, if they're not growing as well, they're going to change. And so I think that's probably the hardest part that a lot of us get stuck in the growth mindset is that if other people aren't changing as well, the relationship's going to shift. As we get better and we get healthier, we're going to settle for less, chaos and less unhealthy behaviors from other people. And so just be prepared that things will shift, but you will feel better if you continue on that path.
Next question. What influenced you to become a leader?
Oh, honestly, being the oldest, so I have 10 younger siblings from different parents and things. And so I think I was just kind of naturally put into that position where I needed to protect my siblings. Like I said, one of my parents, they're both involved in substance use, and one of them is in and out of prison, and we were in pretty compromising situations as children. And so I think that's ultimately what inspired me to first be a leader, is to help make sure that they were okay and that they were safe. And so I think that just kind of stuck with me as I grew up. And then truly that speaking up and using my voice to go into foster care and make sure that we're safe, that is honestly where I got my first taste of leadership. And then being involved in the youth advisory board, which is like a student council, or if you're involved in a youth council, like Florida Youth Council, they have those for foster care as well. And so then I realized that there's other people, and those connections really helped me. And that I really want to make things better for people. And I really want to help people to be the best person that they can be. And so I think that's really what inspired me to be a leader.
Okay.
Well, we have time for one more question. This is actually a question that I wrote down for you. I know some people have gone through growing pains and dark paths, and you mentioned about mental health. And since this is still a conversation that has been impacted a lot of people in many ways, recently, my question for you is, what is your best advice for people with disabilities or who are non-disabled that you can actually give for them for the next generation?
Give to them so that they can pass it on to the next generation? Or what advice?
For any advice for the current generation or for the next generation, to want to become leaders, but also at the same time, they also want to focus on how to deal with your mental health first, because I think that's the most important thing that for everybody right now, that we have to focus on our mental health. We have to focus on a lot of things, even though a lot of people are going through difficult times. But what is your advice for anybody out there?
That is such a great question. There's another quote that I love. I do not remember who said it. It wasn't me. That said, when we're young, we focus on changing the world. When we are older and wiser, we focus on changing ourselves. And, there's all these things about you can't pour from an empty cup and all of that stuff. But truly, I believe that the more work that I do on myself and get to know myself and accept and love myself, that has been a really hard journey for me, to love myself. And the more that we do that and focus on healing whatever traumas we've had, inner child work is huge. If you haven't done any of that yet, I would, encourage people to do that, whether you do it with a therapist or through journaling or something like that. I've had to overcome a lot of barriers myself around judgments around accepting myself. I never accepted myself, which I think is why I tried to accomplish so much stuff and gain worth through all of that. But when I went through the healing journey of dealing with trauma, the only way through pain is through pain, right? If that's how we transform. And so the answer to pain is within pain. And so when I've embraced that pain and healed it, and learned to take care of myself, and sometimes that means getting up at the same time, drinking water, meditating, going to meetings, talking, doing outreach to other people. Those are the things that make me take care of myself. And
sorry to interrupt you, Lacey.
Yeah.
But we have to wrap this up.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So I would just.
But to let everybody know, Lacey will be back tomorrow. She will be the third session tomorrow from 4 to 5. So if you have any questions from today's that you couldn't get answered, she will be here tomorrow and you can have them answered then.
And just to let everybody know, we have a report card, and it's in the link in the comment section below. So make sure you click on the link and you fill out that survey and click submit.
And thank you again, Lacey, for being here with us today.
Thank you.
We're off to get us some lunch. We look forward to being back here for our next session, featuring Carly Fahey and Alyssa Bolton from IEL, presenting on the zigzags of life from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. right here on the Family Cafe's Facebook page, shared through the Florida Youth